Hi everyone. Yesterday we all started this year's Level Up journey. I would like to talk with you about your opportunity to level up as well as our opportunity to grow and develop. What I'd like to focus on in this brief message is the power of having growth mindset. In order to self-develop and continuously adapt to the changes around us, we must practice a growth mindset. Each and every one of us should acknowledge the fact that learning must be part of our day-to-day, to believe in our ability to develop and proactively own our personal growth. However, there is no growth without change. Change means moving from something we know and may have grown naturally to something new with a touch of uncertainty. Some of us are likely already experiencing this in the changes that we have been embracing this past year. When we combine growth and change, we can level up. When we also do it together, we can change and grow faster. This is where power of being part of a larger group that is committed to a shared vision comes in. Growth is great. Challenges are there to show us the way and to remind us there is always another way to solve things, always more options to explore. I would like to invite us all to grow and grab this opportunity to develop our skills and capabilities. But it starts with embracing the right mindset. To kick off this journey, I would like to invite Ariel Halevi to guide us through essentials, interpersonal skills, and concepts that will help us level up.
Thank you very much, Dalit. It really is a great pleasure to be part of this incredible virtual event and to kick off a series of training sessions that myself and my colleagues from Weimar are going to be sharing with you today and tomorrow. Weimar has spent the last 20 years studying and understanding the aspects of human nature that have to do with persuasion, influence without authority, decision-making, rational thinking, non-rational thinking. And what we've done is we've put together a series of short taster videos for you as a prelude to some of the content you can expect to receive in the coming year. What I'm going to be doing today is sharing with you an introductory session, a foundation that's going to be at the base of every one of the short sessions you go through tomorrow. I hope you find it relevant and interesting. Now, if I had to condense 20 years of experience over dozens of countries and over a dozen industries into one uniform principle that guides everything that we do in this area, it's the following principle. Imagine that human beings are a machine. Imagine we're like a computer. We have software, we have hardware. And at the end of the day, the benefit of what we have with the devices we use is that every time there's a technological update, all we have to do is install it. That's it. A simple click, 5 minutes later, and usually those upgrades work flawlessly. But with the human brain, it's a little bit different. When you think about our evolution as Homo sapiens over the past almost 400,000 years, you realize that our rate of innovation progresses exponentially, while our rate of adaptation progresses linearly. And what you get in the realm of the digital revolution and in the unbelievable rate of change that we've been experiencing over the past 500 years is this realization that our operating system is outdated. In many, many cases, we're cave people. I don't mean to offend you. This relates to me as well. In many, many aspects, we are cave people. So many of our responses to the world around us are automatic, knee-jerk responses that have evolved over a long period of time to help us survive and thrive in a reality that simply doesn't exist anymore. Speed over accuracy, short-term over long-term, these have been major advantages to the human race as we've evolved to the top of the food chain. The problem is that these automatic responses evolved to help us work and survive in a set environment that barely changed. Generation after generation used to exist under the same paradigm. Now you think about the single last generation, 25 years ago. How many paradigms have completely changed the way we understand the world? The very fact that I could be standing here right now, delivering this session to you, and you're sitting there in front of your computer all around the world, the signal going through the satellites instantaneously, this is new and completely unnatural to the human race. So when we take this automatic system and we try to apply it in the workplace, it's no wonder we're having so many problems. Escalations, silo culture, anxiety, depression, frustration, critical interfaces that don't work with us. All of these problems stem from this uniform principle that our operating system is outdated. And that's why what I'm going to be doing with you today is sharing with you a little bit about how we got here. What is it that has caused this major shift, and what is the very, very detrimental price we are paying in the form of a very specific emotion that has been grinding away and disappearing from the workplace? And I'm talking about empathy. Now, I don't think I would have an argument with any of you. I doubt any of you would challenge me if I said to you how important empathy is between people. When you think about the meaningful relationships in your life, the partnerships that actually work, almost always you will find a varying degree of empathy between the people working together and collaborating. But somehow, in the modern workplace, we are seeing the emotion of empathy becoming all but extinct. And what I want to show you right now is this idea called operational empathy, which we define as our ability to understand and relate to the challenges that our critical interfaces within the organization are dealing with. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you want to bring in an outside vendor, but you have to get approval from procurement. You cannot bring in a vendor without getting a PO number. You're in a rush. You want to have the vendor next week. You didn't clear it with procurement, and now they're not giving you the PO. What's your immediate response? Are you upset? Let's say you're a salesperson who has to close a deal in this quarter. You've projected this deal, it's part of your bonus, but legal will not approve the contract. They're asking you to change these small or meaningful clauses in the contract, and you just know that if you have to bring that back to your customer, you're losing 3 months. Those legal people can never rely on them, right? That's the instinctive response. That's the survival mode that gets upset when anything stands in our way. Operational empathy, completely opposite. If I'm not getting a PO from procurement, let me try to figure out why. What are they trying to uphold? What are some of the responsibilities they were given as an organization? What is their right to exist as an organization? And how is their response to me in service of that right to exist? My ability to understand that and relate to it is crucial to my ability to display empathy to them. It doesn't mean that I have to take it lying down. It doesn't mean I can't challenge it or ask to have certain procedures changed. But generally what we want to do is we want to be able to reverse that instinctive response from anger to understanding. Later, we can take whatever action we want. Now, there are 3 main historical revolutions that we believe have played a magnificent role in the promotion of humanity, but all have one thing in common. They completely eradicate empathy from interpersonal dynamics. The first evolution I'm going to talk about is a big one. 400,000 years, zoom out. What is the journey that we as a human race have been going through, and why has that eradicated empathy? The second revolution is going to be the revolution of the corporate structure. What has been happening to organizations over the past 200-300 years, especially when we compare before and after the Industrial Revolution? And finally, a revolution that we were born into, the communications revolution, the technology revolution that makes it possible for me to communicate with you right now. There is no argument that every one of these revolutions has dramatically affected our ability to be productive and to reach more people and to collaborate as a species. But what I'm going to show you now is what it did to our operating system when it comes to our response to other people around us. Let's start with the first one. For those of you who have not heard of the Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari or have not reviewed his book, A Brief History of Humanity, I strongly recommend it. When I watched his course online, I walked around dazed for months because of how many paradigms it shattered and made me rethink. And when I was done, I tried to process the entire impact of the book into what it means for me and for my company, Vayamar, and how we do business and how we understand interpersonal dynamics in the workplace. And I was able to condense it into one simple principle. We have shifted from small, closely knit communities to one vast global community of strangers. How many of you know me? How many of you have met me or have heard about me before? For those of you who haven't, which is probably the majority, It's not natural that you're sitting down and listening to a perfect stranger tell you something about how maybe you can do better in the workplace. Who am I to you? Why should you even listen to me? This idea of strangers collaborating is a modern development, and it goes against very basic principles of our social evolution. When we look back at how we used to exist for the vast majority of our time on this planet, what we find are social constructs that are pretty simple. We maybe met 50 to 150 people our entire lives. And when we did interact with these people, we had so many things that were fundamental in common with them. We spoke the same language. We were familiar to one another. We had the same dress code. We had the same cultural codes. We went through famines together. We hunted together. We grew up together. There was fundamental trust built into the equation. And trust is a very, very important foundation to empathy. Now fast forward 500 years, 200 years ago, 50 years ago. How many people do you meet, pre-COVID, I should say, every single day? Thousands. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean meet, shake hands, get to know each other, have coffee. I mean interact with from the evolutionary perspective. Meaning people who are close enough to you physically that if they wanted to, they could harm you. When you're driving a car, every single other vehicle in your vicinity who could theoretically decide to steer away into you and hurt you, from an evolutionary perspective, that's an interaction. When you're standing, getting on a plane around hundreds of people, every one of those people is somebody in your vicinity that from an evolutionary perspective, your brain is gauging to figure out, am I in danger? So when I say we interact with thousands of people every day, pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, that's what I mean. Now, when I bring it through a filter that is more meaningful and I say, not just interacting by standing next to somebody on the street, but actually interacting in the workplace, think about these 5 building blocks. Think about how these 5 building blocks affect your dynamic. Do we have physical proximity? No. I'm thousands of miles away from you. Is English the native tongue for everybody on this conference? No. Do we know the same people? Did we go to barbecues together? Did we hunt together? Did we grieve together? Did we celebrate together? Probably not. This is why team building and retreats and offsites have evolved into being such an important thing in building in empathy and collaboration in the workplace. But they happen once a year, twice a year. The regular interactions don't have any one of these building blocks, which means, of course, that there's a part of our brain that sees the other person and immediately says, danger. I don't know this person. That part is called the amygdala. And the amygdala is one of the oldest parts of our brain to evolve, in contrast to our frontal cortex, which is the last part of the human brain to evolve, and, by the way, the last part of the individual's brain to evolve. Our frontal cortex isn't fully developed until we're 25. Our amygdala is alive and kicking at the age of 15. So for those of you who have kids who are teenagers and you're thinking, they're crazy, these kids are crazy, you're not entirely wrong from a neurological perspective. Now, you've all heard this idea of how the 3 famous F's of how do we respond when we come across a stranger. Take a minute, try to think if you know them. There are 3 famous words that start with the letter F, which represent the automatic response to somebody we don't know. Can you think about it? Let me give you the first one. Fight. The rest is probably rolling off your tongue. Flight. Freeze. 3 universal responses, by the way, not unique to the human race. Anytime an advanced mammal or creature faces danger, these are the 3 most famous responses. Now, about 15 to 20 years ago, a 4th F evolves. What do we do when we come across a complete stranger at a party before an interview? What's the 4th F? Come on. We Facebook them. Now, I know Facebook is for old people. My niece tells me that all the time. But at the end of the day, we still have billions of people using this platform. And one of the common things we do with Facebook is, let's look the person up online. I want to get to know, first of all, how many friends do we have in common? What kind of music do they follow? What's their politics? Do they like animals? Where do they volunteer? Where do they work? This is something that our brain requires, because our brain does not want to take the risk of getting close to or interacting with somebody who could technically hurt us or kill us. Now, I don't think the person behind the camera is likely to kill me. I have that fundamental trust. But that's my frontal cortex telling me, don't worry, he's a nice guy. When I walked into this room for the first time, every single person I didn't know in this studio, my amygdala was immediately lighting up, trying to figure out how can I get as much information as possible about this individual. Because if they're dangerous and I'm wrong about them, they could kill me. Now, if they're not dangerous and I'm wrong about them, no harm done, so I missed an opportunity to meet somebody nice. We are designed to be careful because the world used to be a very dangerous place. Some of you might think it's still a dangerous place today, but I assure you there's probably no time in history that you would want to go back to from the perspective of the risk you would be exposed to. So this summarizes the first evolution. The evolution of the human race from a social perspective, how we shifted from small, closely knit communities where everybody knew everybody to a large community of strangers. Let's fast forward. Let's take a look at an evolution that actually has only been taking place about 300 years ago. The evolution of the corporate structure. When you think about corporations before the Industrial Revolution, what you will usually find is a very, very simple pyramidal structure. Everybody reports to the same boss. Almost always, these organizations were all confined to the same geographic location. Basically, a company was a group of people working together in a way that was very similar to the village. Physical proximity, same language, everybody working together, and everybody reporting to the person at the top of the pyramid. But then, the world got smaller. And in contrast, corporations got larger. And as they got bigger and bigger, they had to come up with a way of sustaining the growth. So what did they do? They did what they knew best. They replicated past practices. Big mistake. Just like Dalit said, growth requires change. And change means that we no longer do what we know to be safe and comfortable. Rather, we endeavor into something that is new. Now, a lot of people think change is because we did something wrong. But really, for many, many companies who are successful, change is a result of success, not failure. But when we look back at these corporations, we find that they said, look, we had a pyramid, it worked. Let's just replicate the pyramid. The problem was that by using this replication approach, they didn't just replicate the structure. They replicated mistakes. Because these pyramids evolved into silos that didn't communicate with each other, which is exactly why the matrix management structure evolved. For those of you who are less familiar with the matrix management structure, basically what that structure says is, it says, look, we're going to keep the top of the pyramid. What are we going to keep in the top of the pyramid? We're going to keep the people who head the business. We're going to keep the people who head sales, generally speaking. I'm simplifying. There are a lot of different variations. But in a nutshell, that's what the matrix management system does. What about everybody else? What about all the people who don't belong to the business from a management perspective and who don't do sales? Let's talk about HR. Let's talk about legal, procurement, finance. What happens to all of these professional organizations within the company? Where do they belong? So they don't sit under the pyramid. They sit across and under the pyramid. So now what we have is, we have all the pyramid tips, and then on the side, we have all of the support organizations who now evolve into being centers of excellence. So now, when somebody makes a legal mistake with a contract, that mistake is identified by the person at legal who found it. That individual communicates it to his or her colleagues within the legal organization, and then they take that knowledge to the rest of the organizations in the company. Amazing. Now we have these incredible centers of excellence, and companies don't have to make the same mistakes over and over again. But what happened to the cave person part of our brain? When you think about all of these people, suddenly they're not just reporting to one person. Now they're serving two masters. Because on the one hand, they have to serve as gatekeepers to the excellence that they are generating within their organization. So anybody within HR has to answer to the head of HR from a professional excellence perspective. But they also have to provide service to the professional organizations, the business units that they support. What happens when there's a clash? What happens when there's excellence on the one side, but urgency on the other? Now what? So now these people are getting torn apart, and they have split identities. Not very good for the cave part of our brain. Now, how does this manifest into operational empathy? Well, number one, what we've done is We've taken one organization, we've completely fragmented it into various different organizations. And every one of these organizations is now measured differently. If you want to shape behavior, all you have to do is create the right key performance indicators for wherever it is you're trying to manage. So now, is HR being measured the same way legal is? Can legal be measured the same way IT is? It can't. Every organization has to have relevant KPIs. But these KPIs don't communicate with one another. They don't correlate. They're not apples to apples. And when you think about the fact that every one of these professional centers of excellence, these internal support units, all drive or receive their budget from one centralized source, and there's never enough, what you just created is internal warfare. You've not just created split identities, but you've created conflicting goals. That is not conducive to operational empathy. When you see somebody who's competing with you for resources, whose ability to meet their goals may be at the expense of your meeting your goals, you cannot expect empathy, and you're not likely to get collaboration, knowledge sharing, and coordinated execution. And that's why organizations are very, very wise in creating events and workshops, like I said before, offsites, but also in bringing in professional sessions where people can learn how to collaborate, creating unified goals, creating interfaces that work together. All of this, in a way, is meant to create internal efficiency based on operational empathy. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the evolution of communication technologies. You know, they talk about various revolutions the human race has gone through. And the first one that when you look back in history as being the single most important first revolution we as a species have gone through happened 70,000 years ago. I'm talking about the language revolution. At the time, it is theorized that there were 15 different humanoid species roaming the planet. It wasn't just us. We had the Neanderthals and so on and so forth. 70,000 years ago, the Homo sapiens, for some unknown reason, there's a mutation in our development. And we can speak. We can use language, which means we can share information, which also means we can coordinate. And when you have a group of people pooling resources and aligning their goals and coordinating, there's absolutely nothing these people can't achieve. So now what's happening is you have the Homo sapiens that have this immense evolutionary advantage over the other humanoid species, and within approximately 30,000 years, there are no more human species on the planet aside from the Homo sapiens. 40,000 years ago, we conquered the top of the food chain. And when you think about the subsequent revolutions we went through, right? The printing press, the telephone, the fax, all of the wheel even. Think about the wheel as a communications device. Why? Because using the wheel, we can now travel further, faster. And anywhere a person goes, their ideas go with them. So when we look at the various evolutions and revolutions we've gone through over the past 70,000 years, the thread that goes through so many of them has to do with how quickly an idea can travel, how far it can travel. And in that respect, we've really hit the big league. I think the next thing for humanity would probably be telepathy, if it were ever possible. Because we are able to communicate today across the planet within split seconds, and that's incredible. We can upload a video to YouTube and have 1 billion people see it. We can tweet and have 1 million people see it. That's pretty remarkable. But once again, it comes at a price. And that price is called the communication gap. And the communication gap is what we believe undermines operational empathy. Look, on the one hand, communication technologies are jumping up. But for some reason, so many people we communicate with, so many clients we interview, say, look, we have a major communication problem in the company. The quality of communication just doesn't seem to be what it used to be. Now, this is not simply a generation gap where every generation thinks the one after them is missing something. There's actually something here, and you may have seen it in the slide that I just revealed. One thing that is missing in most of the communication tools that we've developed, especially the ones that have been developing for the past 50 years, since the huge explosion of the internet and the digital revolution, are the signals. Yes, I'm standing before you. You see my body. You see how I'm dressed. Yes, you can see my face. You can hear my accent. Can you see the micro expressions on my face? Can you smell me? Can you sense the tension in my muscles? This technology still doesn't allow for that. And these critical signals really are important, because when we talk about the evolution of the human brain, we are talking about this incredible, incredible organ inside of our body that has developed the most refined sensitivity to information. And I'm going to show you an example in just a few seconds. Our brain is wired to gather as much information as it possibly can when it comes to interacting with its environment, and especially when it comes to interacting with people around us. It's looking for that information because it's trying to figure out, am I in danger or not? What can I tell about the person sitting before me? Are they honest? Are their intentions pure? Can I trust what they're telling me? So in the early 80s, they ran this magnificent experiment in Stanford University. And in this experiment, they had students walk into a room, one by one, every student on their own. And what was waiting for them in the center of the room was a simple table, a notepad, a pen, and two seemingly identical pictures of a face shot. It wasn't the picture I'm showing you now. This is just for illustration. But take a look at this picture. Take a look at this woman. Take a few seconds and see if you can mark any differences you can find between the two images. Maybe there's a color difference. Maybe there's a slight change in her hairdo. Maybe in one picture she's smiling. Maybe the coloring is a little bit different. Maybe the lighting comes from a different angle. Take a look at this picture. Can you see the difference? So here's what happened. Student after student after student would walk in, spend a few minutes in front of the picture, and then would leave the room. They were instructed to take the notepad with them because they didn't want what they found to be seen by the next student in line. 100% of the students left the room with an empty notepad. Unanimous conclusion, and they did this over and over again. The pictures are identical. Okay? Thank you for participating in this experiment, they were told. We would like to offer you some kind of a token of our appreciation. Why don't you take one of the two pictures with you? Which one do you prefer? So the students were confused. What do you mean, which one do I prefer? They're identical. I know. Just pick one. What do you think was the distribution of pictures? How many people picked the first one? How many picked the second one? Now, I want to preamble this by telling you, they realized early on when they ran this experiment that right-handed people reach with their right hand and naturally take the picture on the right. So they ran the experiment again. They mixed them up. And unlike what you're seeing on your screen, the pictures were not marked with an A and a B. They were without any real visible difference. So how many people do you think took each of the pictures? What was the split? If the pictures were truly identical, you would probably expect a 50-50 division between the images. That's not what happened. 80% of the people who participated in this experiment chose one picture over the other over and over and over again. So I'm going to ask you again. Take a look at the picture. Do you see a difference? Clearly there was a difference. Remember, I'm talking here about the lost signals in interpersonal communication. Can you see the difference? Try now. I'm helping you out a little bit. Okay. So some of you have probably instantaneously seen it. Some it may take another second. But the picture that people preferred 8 out of 10 times was a picture where her pupils were slightly dilated. 0.5 millimeter more open pupils versus the other picture. And that's the picture people preferred 8 out of 10 times. Why? Why would enlarged pupils cause people, compel people, without them even knowing why, to prefer one picture over the other? Because our brain is wired to recognize really significant information, even when that significant information is very, very hard to see. When do our pupils dilate in regular conditions? Now, I'll spare you the most common answer I get when I teach in university. When you're smoking, when you're high, forget that for a minute and forget when it's dark outside. I'm only talking about interpersonal dynamics. You meet somebody and something happens and your pupils dilate. And that's not the only thing that happens. Blood rushes to your face. Your lips get swollen and red. Your cheeks blush. Why? What's happening? When will our body respond this way to somebody? You got it. When you're attracted. When you see somebody and they turn you on and you have this physical chemistry and you're attracted to one another, your body will immediately jump into that mode and communicate that information to the other person, because that is positive information and it's conducive to courting, which is a big part of evolution. So let's go back to Stanford. These students are staring at these two images and they can't tell the difference, but they figure they have to make a decision, so what the heck? They reach out for a picture, and in that moment, that cave person part of their brain whispers in their ear and says, this one's attracted to you. They're like, I'll take this picture. Now, this experiment was replicated multiple times, and the results were repeated multiple times. We are dramatically influenced by this kind of information. Now, let's go back to the communication gap. Let's go back to these incredible, innovative technologies that allow us to communicate all around the world instantaneously. Can you see my pupils right now? Can you tell if I'm excited or not? You can't. Even when you're on Zoom and you're sitting right in front of the camera, many, many times the quality of the connection is pixelated and you can't get that critical information. And that is a very big problem, because when we don't have that information, we can't make a decision. When we don't have information and we can't make a decision, we default to the mode that is safest for us. And that mode is to assume the worst. We don't assume the worst because we really think the person in front of us is bad. We assume the worst because that is the smart thing to do from an evolutionary perspective. And we are still subject to that evolutionary development. Even if we think we're this great creature that conquered the planet, we are still a machine. And we are still subject to the hundreds of thousands of years of our own evolution. We're just not aware of it. And that's why this talk is the one I chose to kick off the series of sessions that I'm going to talk to you about in just a few seconds. So, when you think about these emojis, these GIFs, the emoticons, where did that come from? You may think it's a random thing, and it might be a random thing. But to me, when I look at emojis through the perspective of everything that I just shared with you, it makes perfect sense. The human brain wants the information. It will find a way of getting it. And there is now emerging research about the use of emojis in communications. And it has been found that people who use emojis are considered easier to get along with, are better communicators, and in one article, even have better sex life. It's also being used in court cases. Today, emojis constitute communication. And if you use a fist, that could be assault. And there are certain emojis that are considered, sexual harassment. These things are here to stay. And if you ask me, and yes, I'm biased, we're going to talk about biases in some of our sessions, but everything that I've seen over the last 20 years tells me that the evolution of emojis is the most natural technological development given the communication gap that I just spoke to you about. So, where does that leave us? Well, I hope in the very least that I was able to convince you that there is such a thing as an operating system in the human brain, just like there's an operating system in other machines that we operate. That's the first thing I hope you walk away with. The second thing I hope you walk away with is, it's outdated. That knee-jerk response, that inner gut feeling that we all want to trust, not so trustworthy. And therefore, we have to take action. We have to be proactive. We have to empower the frontal cortex of our brain to use it in times where we cannot trust the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and so on, those older parts of our brain. I'm not saying ignore your emotions. I'm not saying ignore your intuition. I am saying they are now suspect. And we need to find ways, tools, methodologies, tips and tricks to actually get ahead of the world around us and to upgrade our own operating system so that we can actually get the best of both worlds. Now, when it comes to operational empathy, the good news is that in spite of the fact that we are subject to these massive historical evolutions that I just gave you, they seem so large and we seem so small within them. When it comes to operational empathy, it's entirely in our control. Because you don't have to change all of humanity in order to bring operational empathy back into your workplace. You only have to change things in yourself that will trigger through reciprocity this emotion between you and the people around you. If you identify 5, 10, 15 people that you work with most often, these are your critical interfaces, the people you have no authority over but depend on, or people who you are a critical interface to them. These are the people on your team. These are your managers, maybe a few of your clients, a few of your vendors, a few of your partners. Make a list. It can even go up to 30 people. If you walk away from our talk today saying, these 30 people, I am going to proactively bring empathy back into our dynamics, that's really all you need to make a dramatic change. Now multiply that by every single person listening to me right now, and what you have is this ripple effect within the organization, and within a matter of weeks to months, you see a major transformation. And what's great about developing empathy is you don't need permission from anybody. You don't need a job title. You don't need a budget. You don't need any kind of paperwork or approval. Empathy is entirely within your control. When you display empathy, usually you're going to get it back because of this concept called reciprocity, the human nature's tendency to respond to its environment the way the environment is dealing with them. That's why when people frown, people around them are more likely to frown. But if you smile, people are more likely to smile at you. You can trigger this response, and all you need is awareness and consistency. Now, I'm not going to leave it at that. I'm going to show you how else myself and my team at Weimar can help you do this in the series of talks that you're going to get tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about how we can go back to basics. And we're going to give you 6 taster videos. Every video is going to be roughly 15 minutes long. And in those videos, we're going to show you 6 different perspectives that you should be aware of and that you should pay attention to and proactively invest in the workplace. And I'm not suggesting you do this because it's going to improve the company's likelihood to succeed, which it probably will, or because it's going to improve the company's likelihood to be profitable, which it probably will. These are not my primary concerns, and I apologize to everybody who brought me into the session. For me, the primary concern is your ability to enjoy your work, to have less anxiety, to look at your phone, see the calendar, see the next meeting, see the people attending that meeting and smile and have a warm feeling in your stomach that says, I like this person. That's up to you. The other things, growth, financial success, profitability, they will follow suit scientifically. But it starts with you. So what are these 6 sessions that we're going to be giving you? Well, the first one is called Managing Cognitive Biases. It is very closely related to what I talked to you about today. It talks about many aspects. It's going to take a deeper look than I did today at that ancient operating system, at that series of automatic responses that we have. Because when you are aware of cognitive biases, which are automatic responses, you can't neutralize them, but you can mitigate them. And that's a very, very important thing. So there's going to be a 15-minute video introducing the concept of cognitive biases, going a little bit deeper than I did today, showing you some academic sources, and then they're going to teach you one of them. In fact, every one of these 6 videos is going to have a theoretical introduction, and then one example of a tool that you can learn. These videos are designed to be a taster, so that you can then decide which topic you like more, and then sign up to the relevant longer session that you're going to have with us later this year. What else are we going to have? Number 2, presentation skills. Now you may say, again, haven't we done this like over and over again in our career? Who has not ever been in their career in some kind of public speaking or presentation workshop? And the answer is, yep, again. Why? Because the world has changed. And what we learned about presenting 10 years ago is slightly different than how we need to present today. Because guess what? You're not sitting in the same room with the people anymore. You don't have the luxury of shaking their hands or sitting across the table from them. You're now framed in a small screen. When you share your slides, your image shrinks, less signals in the communication process, much harder to schmooze and small talk. How about sales? How about presenting a product or a demo to a client that you never actually sat in the same room with? How is that affecting their response to you? So yeah, again, presentation skills, except adapted to the age that we live in right now. Number 3, remote communication. Builds directly into presentation skills, but actually talks about everything that doesn't have to do with the actual presentation. I'm sure you have a lot of calls, a lot of conference calls with clients where you're not showing a deck. How do you do that? How do you build rapport remotely? For you who do sales in the organizations, who have experienced firsthand the difficulty of acquiring new clients without actually being in the same room with them, how can we build rapport remotely? How can we get people who've never seen us before not to think that we are strangers and have that amygdala immediately jump them into a fight, flight, or freeze response? There are various techniques that can help you do that, shifting from stranger to familiar to similar to ally. And in that video, we're going to show you exactly how to go along that path. Taster video number 4, key stakeholder management. Remember those 30 people I talked about before that you could proactively build empathy with? Well, if you take a subsection of those people who we call key stakeholders, these are people who are more significant in your operational landscape to your ability to succeed than anybody else that you're working with. It doesn't mean the other people are not important. It just means that on the critical path that is your operational roadmap, there are certain individuals with whom it is critically important that you are able to build a good working relationship. We're going to show you how to do that because there is actually a scientific way based on KPIs and a roadmap and everything to how you can proactively build a relationship that is professional. And by the way, one of the byproducts is these people, they might actually become your friends. If you don't go to work to meet friends, don't worry about it. But this is another great byproduct that you can expect. Video number 5, the persuasion table. Look, there are so many circumstances that have been affecting over the last 40 minutes your impression of me. Whether you've seen me before or not, what's the size of screen that you're looking at, what time of day in the time zone are you logging in, how well you slept last night, are you hungry? There's actually going to be a whole section on hunger in this presentation. And we're going to talk with you about this concept of 10 core variables of persuasion that if you are aware of, and if you know how to manage and manipulate during interpersonal dynamics, whether they're in person or remote, you can actually dramatically affect the outcome of that interaction, mainly their response to you, starting with operational empathy, but ending with something that could be much bigger, such as chemistry. A lot of people think chemistry is not something you can mess with. The ancient Greeks called chemistry the gift of the gods. That was the origin of the meaning of the word in Greek, the gift of the gods. But chemistry is not the gift of the gods. Chemistry is a pattern. And when you understand the pattern, the rules behind the pattern, you can actually dramatically increase the chemistry you have with people around you. Yes, even the people that right now you're shaking your head and saying, I don't like that person doesn't like me, we're never going to get along. Believe me, almost all people can be made to have chemistry with one another. The outliers are rarer than you might think. And finally, strengthening our resilience. Very, very important. Empathy is about taking your own emotional energy and investing it in somebody else. Empathy is about being able to stop for a moment, experiencing the world from your own eyes and seeing it from the eyes of the other person. But that requires reserve energy. That means that I have enough that I can allocate to somebody else's perspective. But when my resilience is undermined and worn out, and you probably have experienced this many times at home and at work, days where you didn't sleep very well, you were under a lot of pressure, you had a project fail, you had a budget cut, somebody left your team unexpectedly, and you start building up this layered burnout. And when that happens, the first people to experience it are the people around you because you no longer have the capacity to placate them emotionally. Now, I can't think of a time more critical to talking about how to rebuild our resilience than now. Not only because we've just gone through a very, very difficult year that started with forest fires in Australia well before COVID. If you think back on this year and you see how many different things have happened before COVID, and then you factor COVID into it, the separation from our loved ones, working from home, the tension with our kids, this unbearable dealing with the fact that we are mortal, that we might be infected and die. These are things that scare us, and fear undermines resilience. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a 15-minute taster video that's going to tell you a little bit about the longer session you can expect later in the year, which is going to include theoretical aspects that go further than I did today, that talk about how does our operating system work. And then we're going to give you very, very practical tools that you can use, tools that are no longer this new age tree-hugging kind of philosophy, tools that have been validated scientifically. It has been proven, for example, that 15 minutes a day of meditation lowers your chance at heart disease by a double-digit range. So we're going to show you some of these things, and I promise you, they're going to be so easy that you're going to ask yourself, how did I not know about this, or why? Why didn't I spend 5 minutes a day doing it? And hopefully, once you've gone through these 6 sessions, you can decide which of them you like more, which is more relevant to you, and then based on that, sign up to the longer sessions that you're going to have later this year. I'm very, very excited about the fact that you, myself, all of us cave people are going through this process together, and I'm looking forward to your experience with the rest of my team at Weimar tomorrow. And if there's any other question that you have about this, if you're curious, if you want to find more resources, we've created an entire resource center that will be made available to you. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity of speaking before you, being part of this incredible virtual event, and being part of your journey. I hope you found this session valuable, and I look forward to meeting you in person very, very soon.